أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله القاسم الجبارين الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمخلوقين سيدنا ونبينا وشفينا أبو القاسم محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون بذنب كذاي وتسليما لأمري. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum. This is the third of our deliberations in this month of Muharram. And those of you who have been here before the last two know that we have chosen to look at the wider range of the lovers of Ahlul Bayt and all kinds of developments which have happened, covered different kinds of peoples we know and we hear about, but we don't know what they believe in, how they believe, how much they believe or not believe. So we have yesterday looked at the Alavis in Turkey, the Alawites in Syria, the Druze also in Syria and Lebanon, and so on. And today we want to look at the Zaidis, who are mostly in Yemen today, because again, like the Alavis and the Alawites, the Zaidis are also in the news at the moment, and of course subject to quite a brutal campaign of bombardment by the Saudis. So it might be an interesting idea to see where this comes from. So 2 points first. First is that when we look at the post-Karbala scenario, we find that the followers of the Ahlul Bayt are in disarray. Of course, we know the events of Karbala very well and how the whole family and the followers of the Ahlul Bayt were decimated and scattered around, and then a campaign of fear was imposed on them, so they couldn't. So they went into different kinds of modes. Some of them just migrated away to distant places to be away from the center where they were being disturbed. Some of them got together and tried to organize something else. So we have the first, for example, round of the people of Kufa, who organized themselves into what they called the Tawwabun, those who wanted to make Tawbah for their failure to support Imam Hussein. You know that one of the key aspects prior to Karbala was obviously the alleged support of the people of Kufa, sending hundreds of letters, and then the sudden withdrawal of that support and the martyrdom of Muslim ibn Aqil and so on. So post-Karbala, when they realized what's happened, there was a group which built up and said, we need to repent for this. So they called themselves the Tawwabun, and they started to organize and see if they can do something. They went a little way, but they could not really prevail because the Umayyad power was quite strong. This was followed by other revolts by people like Mukhtar al-Saqafi, who wanted to take revenge for Karbala. And he organized people, and then he actually managed to kill a lot of the perpetrators of the Karbala massacre on the ground. Yeah, not Yazid and them, but some of the commanders. But even there, couldn't prevail, and he was killed. And so that was also more or less suppressed. Now, the question for, if you look at the lives of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam and Imam Baqir alayhi salam, you see that they had chosen a life of quiet resistance. They were not willing to have active resistance in this situation. However, there were other people, again followers of the Ahlul Bayt, who said, this is not good enough, we want to be active, we want to do something. And so they were looking for leaders who would give them a lead to be active. And it is in this category you have, for example, Muhammad al-Hanafiya and others. And one of them, which is the subject of our discussion today, is Zaid bin Ali Zain al-Abidin, which means he's the son of the Imam Zain al-Abidin and half-brother of Imam Baqir alayhi salam. Okay? So it's... however, his mother is said to be from Sindh. So sometimes when people got angry with him, they said, oh, what's this son of a Sindhi woman doing here? But generally, he was quite a brave and quite a learned person. He was also taught and studied under one of the leading Mu'tazili sheikhs. Yesterday we saw the idea of Mu'tazilism, which is, broadly speaking, the sort of prominence of reason. Okay, Jafari thinking on Mu'tazilism is not quite, as we will see now, not quite 100% there. We have a number of divergences from Mu'tazili thought, but it is very pro-Mu'tazili. So that's one person who originally actually did not start in Yemen, but went to a place called Dailam in Iran. And his school or his thinking was first established there. Later on, of course, the Zaidis, they came to Yemen, and at the moment most of them are in Yemen, which we will see. Before we go into the theology of these people, let us look at Yemen itself. When you look at Yemen, I'm sorry I couldn't put up a map today because I was quite busy. You see that it is part of the Arabian Peninsula. So when you look at Saudi Arabia, just below Saudi Arabia is Yemen, bordering the whole ocean, right? And there are two or three things we need to know about the importance of Yemen. First of all, a lot of the spread of Islam from the Arabian Peninsula down to the Far East or East Africa has been from Yemen and Oman. So it's the people of Yemen, especially from Hadramaut, who have been quite instrumental. So it means that the Islam there was quite, if you like, rich, robust, and these people were good sailors and good traders, because it is said that a lot of Islam was spread by their trade practices, which was... The second thing to notice about Yemen is that the north and the northwest, the side towards Egypt, if you like, is on the shores of the Red Sea. And the entrance to the Red Sea, you see the entrance to the Persian Gulf on the other side is through the Straits of Hormuz, which is very narrow. And one of the questions which a lot of big powers have is that if there is a conflict with Iran, if they close the Straits of Hormuz, then the whole of the oil supply will be blocked. Similarly, on the other side, the distance between Yemen and Africa is also small. And this is called Bab al-Mandab, which is the entrance to the Red Sea. And then obviously after that, you have the Suez Canal, which was a much later development. So potentially, if there's a conflict with Yemen, even the Bab al-Mandab can be closed or can become unsafe for shipping, which means the whole of the Suez route can go. And we will see this has formed a thing of interest to a lot of foreign powers and others over the period of time. Okay, so Yemen has always been a very rich and interesting society. And it is also said that in the time of the Prophet, I think we saw this last time, first of all, Khalid bin Walid was sent to Yemen to take the message of Islam. But he came back quite unsuccessful. And then the Prophet sent Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he came back successful. And this was said to be one of the start points of a kind of latent enmity against Imam Ali, that why he could succeed, I couldn't, and so on. So yes, it has been rich, and it has been quite well recognized, and there has been a lot of contribution from Yemen to Islam and so on. So, after Karbala, Zaid, the son of Imam Zain al-Abidin, thought about the whole situation, and he made some changes to how we would view Muslim history. And he developed this doctrine which is called Imamat al-Mafdhul, which means that it was possible for a man of lesser excellence to be appointed imam during the lifetime of a man of greater excellence. So, see, if you say this is the most knowledgeable or the best person, still it was possible to appoint a man of lesser excellence. Through this logic, he developed a reasoning that there was no problem in accepting the caliphate of the first and the second caliphs. So he said, it is not a sin for that to have happened. It is just this idea of Imamat al-Mafdhul, although Imam Ali was the best, but we will work with this. However, even he could not really fit this theory into the caliphate of the third caliph. And there is lots of discussion whether that could be fitted here or not, because that's now even not lesser excellence, there's other questions. But anyway, in terms of his thinking, he said, if you do that, you remove one of the key points of contention between the Shia and the Sunni, which is the status of the Caliphate. Okay? The second one, he extended that if that was possible, then most of the companions who accepted that were not blameworthy as well. And therefore, and see how logic works here, and therefore, narrations from them were also acceptable. We couldn't just question the hadith narrations from them, that these are people who had already betrayed Imam Ali, so we cannot accept that. So if you look at hadith, science of hadith, you will see this kind of discussions there. So Zaid, effectively, what he advocated was that we don't need to really question or in any way denigrate the Khilafat of the two first caliphs. We keep quiet on the third caliph. We accept Imam Ali's Khilafat. And then after that, we obviously have a problem with Muawiyah and Yazid and so on. And through the acceptance of the what we call Ashab al-Hadith, those people who were there as non-blameworthy, they also came towards some rulings which we would find difficult. For example, one of them was the permissibility of drinking what is termed nabid. Nabid is some fermented drinks, not wine, but like date, for example, if you ferment that, or rice, or so on. Or in present day Yemen, you have kat, which is very prevalent. So is it permissible or not? The Zaidis think it is permissible. So the other one was, for example, the forbiddance of muta, because they said that although it was permitted in the time of the Prophet, it was forbidden during the time of the second caliph, and therefore it remains forbidden. The other side of the argument was that if it was forbidden in the time of the second caliph, it was permitted by Imam Ali again, so it could be revalidated. So anyway, this kind of small theological differences come, but generally the main thing is that Zaid wanted to position his followers of the Ahlul Bayt in a much wider context so that he didn't have enmity. And this is where we need to understand the meaning of one of the terms, one of the derogatory terms, if you like, which is used for the Shia, and that is Rafida. Rafida literally means rejectionists, people who reject the first three caliphs. So, for example, when Maulana Abul Ala Maududi, who was the head of Jamaat Islam in Pakistan and a leading Sunni scholar, he wrote a book which is called Khilafat wa Mulukiyat, how the Khilafat turned into a muluk, kingdom, hereditary kingdom. And clearly he went into great detail about the time of the third caliph, and he saw how nepotism took over and so on. So the reaction of the Sunni ulama of Pakistan was to brand him as a Rafidi, that this is a man who rejects the caliphs. So like saying that we are closer to Shia. So Zaid positioned himself in such a way that they could not put that kind of accusation on him, because he said, fine, we accept that. We only want to now start from Yazid or Muawiyah, really, and on. And then the next point which Zaid brought was that he does not accept a passive imam. So even he's saying that his father was not quite right, because his father was passive, Imam Zainul Abidin. And Imam Bakr, his half-brother, was passive. So he said, this is not, you cannot have. We don't accept passive imam. We do not accept imam in Gaiba or anything. We need an active imam who is fighting all the time. And this is a character in the Houthis. You will see also now in the Zaidis that this is their character. They always are fighting, and they need an active fighting structure. So these are the theological, if you like, undertones of how and where they are coming from, right? So they only go until 4 imams, and then they have their own imams after Zaid, and so on, until about 19, I think quite a lot we will come, when the last imam sort of retired, and then they went into quiet phase. Now, the person who brought Zaidi school in Yemen is a man called Al-Hadi al-Haq al-Mubin al-Yahya. And he came from Dailam in Iran in about 893, which is quite early. So it's in the very early phase of Islam. And Zaidis ruled Yemen until 1962, when the new kind of government, which we will see, abolished or effectively retired the Zaidi rule. It's still there, but effectively there was no longer that possibility. The other thing which Zaidis believe and say is that the Imam need not be masoom or infallible, can make mistakes, and that is fine. So clearly there are differences between the other Imamis or Ismailis and so on, and the Zaidis on this side. Okay. We have also the question of Ottoman rule to take account of, right? Because as we know, when the Ottomans expanded, they controlled most of the Arab world during the Ottoman caliphates, and of course parts of Yemen as well because of that. And the Ottomans being in very staunch Hanafis, and these people being Zaidis, there was quite an amount of conflict. But the Zaidis, they sort of resisted this kind of activity. Now, they are based in the north and northwest, mostly in tribal areas, mostly in mountainous areas, mostly in villages. And they have a common border with Saudi Arabia. So it's on the border with Saudi Arabia that they are there. About 1 million of them are in Saudi Arabia itself, either as migrants or people who straddle the border or so on. Anything between 32 and 40% of the population of Yemen is composed of Zaidis. The other Yemenis are Hanafi and Shafi, followers of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Shafi. So, for, if you like, nearly 1,000 years, they ruled the place in one form or another, with their imams coming one after the other after they started to have in Yemen. And as I said, also developed a rich outreach to other places in terms of spreading Islam and so on. So it's quite well established thing. And because of the doctrine, as you have seen, there was very little interaction with the other branches of Shi'ism. In fact, at one point, and we will see that on Friday, inshallah, that the Fatimids had quite a big presence in Yemen, and they had a conflict with Zaidis on doctrine. But at the present time, there are very few, I think mostly Bohras present in Yemen, very few. And there are a few Isna Ashari Jafaris as well. But in terms of numbers, this is small. They are not big. But at one point, the Fatimids had a big presence there, and they had a conflict with the Zaidis. Okay, so this is what they are. Now, generally speaking, their relationship with the Saudis has not been bad over history. The relationship has been up and down, but nothing very, if you like, violent has happened. As we come towards this end of the Ottoman rule, those of us who know this history, we will know that part of the British strategy to gain control of that region was to overthrow the Ottomans, the Ottoman caliphs. Okay, and as part of that, they encouraged what is called an Arab revolt against the Turkish ruler, saying that these are not Arabs and you have to revolt. And you have people like Lawrence of Arabia and others instigating this revolt. And then promises were made to what was then Sharif Hussein of Makkah, who was the ruler, saying that if you support the British, they will give you Palestine and Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth. And then, not Saudi Arabia, but the Arabian Peninsula then. And then those promises were broken and so on. However, when the British came, the first thing they did was to occupy Aden. Aden is the port right at the tip of the entrance to the Red Sea. And that was a British base there. Now, just to see the strength of these Zaidis beliefs, they came and asked the Zaidis to join the Arab revolt. And the Zaidis said, no. We cannot side with a Christian power against a Muslim power. Full stop. Get lost. And so they had a clear theological vision that, you see, you cannot do that. Whereas the Saudis, the Jordanians, all of them, they just sided with the British and helped a lot in destroying the Ottoman power. You know, for example, you had things like the Hijaz Railway, there was a railway from the Hijaz, from Makkah, Medina to Turkey, which was broken. So that was the main trade route for the Ottomans, of course. And lots of other things which the British managed to persuade the Arabs of that time to get rid of. But the Yemenis, they didn't join that. So we cannot join. So they were always independent-minded and very strident in their thing. After the, of course, First World War and Second World War, things started to change. And other forces came into play. One of them was that the Suez Canal was opened. With the opening of the Suez Canal, much earlier, of course, you see that it became one of the most vital waterways in terms of transportation of all kinds of commodities and oil and so on from the east to Europe. And so, of course, if you go through the Suez Canal, it's much more cheaper and effective than going around the Cape. So it's also, up to today, it's one of the most vital waterways, yeah. So everybody's interest was there. In fact, again, if we look back at our history, in 1956, the Israelis, the French, and the British, they wanted to invade and take over the Suez Canal and destroy Egypt. But, and this is called the Suez Crisis, the Americans had different ideas. They wanted to get rid of all three of them. So they stopped that, and the British government suffered one of its biggest defeats. And after that, the Americans became the power in that area. Then they did the deal with the Wahhabis and so on. This is where all this problem with Ibn Saud and so on starts from. Okay. So Yemen now, since then, became even more important with the Suez Canal, because that's now controlling the gateway to a large part of the traffic as well. It's not a rich country. It doesn't have so many resources or anything, but it's a rich culture. So then, slowly, of course, Saudis started to become rich, and that wealth started to flow down, because number of people going to work in Saudi Arabia, sending money and remittances and so on. So it became quite independent. But another development in Egypt changed that. And that was the rise of Nasser and Arab socialism. which was, of course, a military-led movement. And then as we saw yesterday, for a brief period of time, Egypt and Syria wanted to become one, and Yemen also wanted to join this United Arab Republic. And this really created a problem for Yemen, because a lot of Yemenis in the south who were not Zaidis, they were, amongst them, there was a large number which were sympathetic to the Egyptian idea of Arab socialism. The Houthis were not, because they understood that this is not something which will be in their favor. However, Nasser invaded. There was a military coup in Yemen by the South people and took over the country. And Nasser sent troops to invade Yemen. And then from there, you start this series of military rule and so on, in the south mainly. And because of that, slowly you get a conflict between north and south. In the north, the Houthis are marginalized and left alone, and the other parts, they begin to move. Now, it's very interesting. At that time, the Saudis, as in contrast to today, the Saudis were very afraid of Nasser-type politics. So they were supporting the Houthis, or the royalists, as they call them, or the imam of the Houthis, to confront Nasser. In fact, effectively, Nasser was sent out, or his troops were defeated. So these developments started to push the Houthis towards looking at establishing their own sort of rule, if you like. And they went, as opposed to the Alawis or the Alawites, they said, no, we want Sharia rule here, and we want to establish this Sharia rule in this form, strict Sharia rule. Which was okay for the Saudis at that time, but for the others, the South, the military, the secular Arabs, and so on, it became a problem. There was a low-level conflict there, not very high, continuing all the time, whilst the Houthis are actually part of the Zaidi community. They are a majority tribe, if you like. So, and the name comes from Badruddin al-Houthi, who was their spiritual leader until 2010. So there was latent conflict, but and the Houthis supported some presidents and some prime ministers, and then Yemen was divided into north and south, and then united back into one during these 20-30 years. But after that, you have another problem emerging. And especially after the 70s, you have the rise of the Wahhabis in Yemen itself, funded from Saudi Arabia, of course. And the birth of what they call the Islah Party, Jamaat al-Islah. People who want to bring purification, really. Islah I would translate as purification, yeah? Islah, yes? Maybe. I mean, broadly speaking, that's what the idea is, to bring it back to the origin, right? Like this, the word Salafi comes from that kind of root as well, yeah? To take it back to the origin. Now, you can see that as soon as you do that in the south, conflict starts with the north, because then they start saying, are you Muslim, are you not Muslim, and we should kill you, and do this and that, and all kinds of things. And so, and actually, anti-Shia movement started in that time, after the 70s. Before, it wasn't anti-Shia. It was just political. After that, it became anti-Shia. And then slowly the Saudis started to change their mind about the Houthis or the imams and so on, said we don't want them and we want to get rid of them and so on, supported all kinds of other side. But it didn't really work well. Because given their history, these people were and are quite strong. In fact, very, very strong and very good fighters. So it was very difficult to defeat them, and they prevailed. Clearly, at that time, also the Americans got interested, yeah, because of the Suez Canal and the traffic going through there and the security of Saudi Arabia. So they started to interfere, bomb, and get involved and do all kinds of things there, which again, the Houthis resisted foreign intervention. As I said, they did not participate with the British against the Ottomans, and here also they did not. So the Americans obviously encouraged the Saudis to do more, to fund these fellows, their Wahhabi kind of fellows, even more. Saudi Arabia started to fund them and create this division in the Yemen until, for example, in 2010, when the conflict was not what it is today, but it was quite serious. A suggestion was put by the Houthi leader that time that they should invite Ayatollah Sistani to be part of a mediation group to mediate between the two sides. Okay. A Saudi cleric who was the Imam of the central mosque in Riyadh gave a khutbah at that time. His name is Muhammad al-Arifi. He said that this is unacceptable because Sistani is an infidel and a fasik. So you can see the kind of change of mood coming from Saudi Arabia against the Houthis. And clearly, given that, you have a mobilization again by the Houthis trying to secure their due rights. And this is the conflict going on now. It started as a political conflict, but it's taking more and more religious turn. In addition to the Islah party, you now have Al-Qaeda there as well, which is mounted in several attacks, and they are called Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula, yeah, AQAP, where, for example, this person, Anwar al-Awlaki, who was an American preacher, was killed there by the Americans because they said he is encouraging the Al-Qaeda there. And obviously, I think we will also see, and there may already be a presence of Daesh-type fellows there as well now. So what's happening now is that the conflict is becoming sectarian, in addition to political. So the Saudis are using the anti-Shi'i rhetoric to make trouble for the Houthis. And obviously, all kinds of other things follow from there. So one of the interesting accusations they bring is that Iran is supporting the Houthis against the Saudis. Yeah. Well, there is no serious evidence of this. And we can see that theologically, Iran would not really support them fully, yeah, because they believe in things which do not tie in with that belief, yeah. As a strategic option, maybe, but as a consistent policy, we don't see that happening. In fact, whenever they say Iran is supporting, they always say, well, there is no evidence, but we think. So if there is no evidence, why do you want to think like that? Yeah. So now what will happen from here on? The Houthis, of course, have taken over large parts of Yemen recently, including the capital Sana'a, and chased away the president and prime minister, who were obviously based in Sana'a and now have been encamped in Aden. Aden is now a sort of protected space. The Saudis have entered into an air war with the Houthis. And see, we were in Medina in last April, and we went for Jummah. And it was a very disturbing khutbah in Medina. The man was saying that, as far as I could understand, I think my Arabic is not that good, but I could follow what he was trying to say. He was saying that, look, these noble people of Yemen, who have always played this great part in the development of Islam, history of Islam, and he named several Sahaba who came from Yemen and all kinds of things, unfortunately has been spoilt by these Rafizis, obviously referring to Iran. And now they have created this hatred between us, but now it has become our sacred duty to fight this and eliminate this kind of rebellion. And this is in the Haram in Medina in last April. So you can see where it is reaching. But to sum up, if for 1,000 years the Zaidis have prevailed there, it means that the love of Ahlul Bayt has been there, and it has been taken to all over the world where they have gone. So you will find a very different take on the Ahlul Bayt in the Shafi areas than in the other areas as before. So inshallah, on Friday we will extend this to the Fatimids and hopefully complete the circle. Assalamu alaikum.
Any questions from either side?
Assalamualaikum. I have about 3 questions. I don't know if I got lost in this, but what was the transition from Zaidis to Houthis?
So Zaidis are all the followers of Zaid in Yemen, right? Houthis are the majority of the Zaidis. This is a tribal. Houthis are tribal. It's a tribe within the Zaidis, right? They are not like a designation. So you say Houthis constitute probably 60% of the Zaidis overall. There are other tribes as well.
And where was it? Why are the Houthis considered Shia? From what you described of the Zaidis and how many basically reject Shias, why are they considered Shia?
Well, they accept 4 Imams. And the Shia, as I said in my first lecture, really the term Shia means Shia of Ali. So those who accept Imam Ali alayhi salam can be classified as Shia. Although the Shia do not refer to them as Shia. You see, the enemies refer to them as Shias. The Shia refer to them as Zaidis.
Yes.
Whenever we speak about the Daesh and Al-Qaeda and different branches of them, I can't help but get this feeling that there's an awful lot of them there, and they have their own secret agendas, and everybody's talking about having different groups of people. I mean, to a layman, it's a simple thing. America sent arms to Afghanistan, created an opposition for the Russians, and so there was born a nationalistic force that was against the Russians. They got too much power, so they started bombing everybody else out of, and establishing their own Islamic state. Similarly, something that I can see from a layman's terms has happened in Iraq, where too many arms were distributed from the armies, and then they got too powerful and they said, I'm the Khalifa, and the other guy says, okay, I'm Al-Qaeda, so everybody else should be killed. Is it as simple as that in Yemen still now? Is there a one nationalistic link to the Saudis, so that those are the people who are fighting on behalf of the Saudi empire? Can we not just leave it there and say anybody who is wishing to overcome the Houthis should be backed by the Saudis? Or is there actually external forces that are also against the Houthi power?
So there are 2 points there. First of all, if you look at this, your idea of the funding of the what really are properly called the Arab Afghans. Okay, a lot of Arabs were encouraged to go to Afghanistan to fight the kufr, okay, of communism. And the funding came from Saudi Arabia, and the arms came from America. Okay, so Saudi paid for the arms, and Bin Laden was one of the fellows who was actually part of that before he switched sides. Okay. Now, the question became this. The important question became this. These guys, as you rightly say, they sort of have in their head that they have destroyed the second biggest power in the world, so we can do anything, which is fine. But now, these guys with this mentality were not going to stay there because the war was finished in Afghanistan. Now they want to come back home. So can you imagine somebody with that idea coming back home and having other funny ideas of how to sort things in their own country? This is exactly what Bin Laden said. He said that when you invite American troops onto the Holy Land, we have to make jihad against you. You see what? So the Saudis panic that these guys, if they come back here, we have a problem because they have these ideas. So now they decide to find ways where they can scatter them in other places. So they send them to Bosnia, they send them to Iraq, they send them all over to Libya and so on. So they don't come home. Because if they come home, we have a problem. So exactly like, for example, the Americans have got these poor fellows in Guantanamo Bay, right? A lot of them, they say there is no charges against them. 20 years. Now the argument is that if we release them without charge after 20 years, these guys will be so angry, they'll do something. So we can't release them now, although they are innocent. Okay, so the Arab-Afghan problem was also the same. And they wanted to scatter them. And still they are continuing to find places where they could scatter them, not come back home. Because when they come back home, we have a problem. Okay? At the same time, they are funding this kind of thinking, takfiri thinking. And they, like in Syria, they are fully funding it, right? Again, the Syria is the same. Money is coming from Saudi Arabia and Gulf countries. Arms are coming from the Americans via Turkey and everywhere else. Technically, they are going to the moderate rebels and then slowly filtering into into Daesh and so on, right? And it is fueling the whole thing. Now that Russia has intervened, Russia is saying, let's cut that line, let's hit these rebels so that we stop their supply line there. And that will then set the scene to finish the Daesh, right? And they are panicking that Russia is now taking matters into his own hands and so on. Anyway, but you see, what I'm saying is that on top of this, in all these conflicts, they want to bring the sectarian dimension to create the hatred necessary for these kind of things to flourish. And in Yemen, they brought the Salafis and Al-Qaeda fellows in the south against the Houthis, who had never, as we saw even in theological terms, they have really tried to accommodate the whole thing and not alienate anybody. They are not saying anything about the Khulafa or this or that, right? So what is your problem with them? And in Iraq, of course, they are against the present government through Daesh and so on. So yes, the Wahhabi thinking and inputs are to create this conflict. Now they couldn't get on. The Americans have joined them because as I said, the Americans are more worried about the Red Sea and the oil routes and so on. So if these guys who are anti-American from the start and Muslim, if they get control of that, we have a problem. And the Saudis, see, this is very interesting, that when the first problems with Iran started, and then there was this possibility that the Straits of Hormuz will be closed someday and oil flow will stop, the Saudis started to build pipelines from the east coast to the west coast, to the Red Sea. Now, if the Houthis control the Red Sea, that pipeline becomes useless. So, you see, it's political, but sectarian fire is being put to help the politics, right? Otherwise, the Saudis, what people ask us, what are you doing? Why are you bombing these people? What's wrong with them? What's wrong with you? But you are right, yeah, this is the problem now. They want to keep those Arab Afghans, their ideas, out of the space.